Welcome, you're here now, and the world can slow down. Tonight, we're setting sail on a long, slow journey into the distant past. A voyage, not of battle or glory, but of damp wood, salty air, and quiet suffering. But the truth, as it often is much less romantic. This is the story of those who lived below deck. We'll begin with the daily grind of a common sailor, where food was spoiled, disease rampant, and survival uncertain. The ones who hauled ropes, scrubbed planks, and tried to sleep while the sea rocked and creaked around them. You've likely heard the stories of daring captains and golden treasure, of wooden ships gliding across endless oceans with wind-filled sails and stars overhead. This is not the story of pirates or admirals, not at first. Over the next 2 hours, we will explore the world of 17th century maritime life. Then, we'll shift into the haunting tale of a shipwreck, a real event that spiraled into fear, mutiny, and death on distant shores. And a different kind of pressure brewed over silver plates and naval decorum. After that, we'll turn to the hidden order within the chaos of piracy, their codes, their rules, and the quiet revolution that lived among outlaws. And finally, we'll gently float to the top of the ship, to the captain's quarters, where luxury met responsibility. So find a comfortable place to rest. Let the tide of time carry you. There's nothing to do now but listen and drift. Let us begin. Imagine it. The year is 1672. Dawn hasn't yet broken. The sky is still a cold shade of blue, soft and heavy with sea mist. Not a sleek yacht or a tidy schooner, but a tall, lumbering merchant ship with wide decks, 3 masts, and a hull already aged and groaning. Her sails are furled tight against the morning breeze, and the crew, half awake and half drenched, move like ghosts in the fog. A gull calls out in the distance, its wings cutting through the damp air. All around you, the harbor stirs with life. Footsteps echo on wet planks. The creak of rope and wood fills your ears. The scent is unmistakable. Salt, mildew, and the lingering smoke of the cook's fire deep below. Someone nearby is already coughing, a deep, chesty sound that tells you this man has likely been at sea too long. His eyes are sunken. His beard is coarse. He nods to you, not in greeting, but in mutual resignation. Men snore softly, their faces half covered by rough blankets. It's too cold at night to remove them, and there's no place to wash them anyway. Everything you wear slowly turns stiff with salt and grime. You itch constantly. The smell is thick. Sweat, mold, and a faintly sour trace of unwashed clothing. The creak of timber is like a lullaby, but the kind that never quite lets you forget where you are. In the corners, rats scurry unseen, their small claws tapping across the floorboards. If it's soft enough to bite, it's probably damp with mold. If you're lucky, it's only stringy. If you're not, it's maggot. The cook scrapes off the worst of it before serving, but not always. If it's dry, it's full of weevils. You learn to tap it gently on the table, watching the tiny black insects crawl out. So sailors are given small rations of beer or watered-down rum instead. By the time it's noticeable, it's often too late. Some captains carry lemons or limes, but most don't. It costs too much. It keeps better. You don't drink to enjoy. You drink to avoid dysentery. They say it's extra protein. No one laughs. You'll come to hear them often. Eventually, you won't even notice. You are about to board a ship, a real sailing vessel of the 17th century. You're not a captain. You're not even an officer. You're an ordinary sailor, a laborer of the sea, nothing more. And the life ahead of you is hard, relentlessly hard. You climb the gangplank with your few belongings bundled in cloth, a coarse wool blanket, perhaps a spare shirt, maybe a knife or a small carved trinket. That's all. You said goodbye to land, to comfort, to family. Your new world is made of wood, salt, and endless motion. The deck is slick underfoot. Tar stains your boots. You descend into the lower deck, your quarters for the months ahead. The ceiling is so low you must hunch. The lanterns flicker weakly, casting a honey-colored glow over rows of hammocks strung side by side. They're packed tightly, scarcely a foot between them. You can hear the soft sway of the hull, the slow drip of condensation falling from the beams. The air is damp. Some hammocks are already occupied. There's no bedding beyond the hammock, no mattress, no pillow. You sleep in your clothes, always, and in the stillness of night, if you're lucky enough to fall asleep, the ship rocks you with an uneven rhythm. Your first meal confirms your suspicions. The stories were true. The biscuit hardtack is like a brick, flour and water, nothing more. Baked until it is almost stone. There's salted pork, but it's almost grey, fatty, smells like brine and decay. Fresh vegetables, a distant dream. Fruit only on the first few days, before it all spoils. Water is stored in barrels and goes stale fast. It smells sour. Sometimes it tastes of the barrel, sometimes worse. Scurvy becomes a shadow that stalks the ship. Gums swell, teeth loosen. Skin bruises for no reason. It comes slowly. By the time it's noticeable, it's often too late. Some captains carry lemons or limes, but most don't. It costs too much. The work you rise with the sun, or before it. The bell sounds, sharp and metallic, cutting through the morning mist. You're expected on deck immediately. Your job varies by the day, the weather, the whim of the boat. Maybe you're scrubbing the deck with a bristle broom and seawater. It's called holy stoning, not for any divine reason, but because you're on your knees while you do it. The lines are slick, your hands chapped raw. One misstep and you fall. No ropes to catch you, no harness. The deck below is hard, and the sea beyond offers no forgiveness. You man the tiller, steer the ship, patch leaks, shovel out water. The wood must be kept clean to prevent rot. It's endless work. Maybe you're climbing the rigging to unfurl the sails. Sails must be adjusted constantly. The wind changes without warning. A sudden squall can shred canvas like paper. You must react quickly. Everyone must. You haul rope until your fingers bleed. You crank pulleys. You move barrels. You scrape barnacles off the hull. Your hands are never clean. Your back never rests. You're always being watched. The bosun keeps order. He's a hard man, promoted not for kindness but for obedience. He carries a rope's end or a cane, and he doesn't hesitate to use it. His quarters are at the stern, spacious by comparison, lined with books and brass instruments. A man might be hanged from the yardarm as a warning, or marooned, left alone on a desolate island to die. He eats better food, drinks better rum, and wears clean clothes. But his word is law. There's no quarantine. If someone falls ill, they're often left in their hammock to sweat it out, or die quietly. There's no real medicine. Maybe some rum. Maybe nothing. If you move too slowly, you're punished. If you speak out of turn, you're punished. If you fall asleep on duty, you're flogged. The captain is a distant figure. You rarely speak to him. Mutiny is the most feared crime. Talk of rebellion, even whispered, can bring swift death. Executions are rare, but not unheard of. Justice is not fair. It is fast. It is final. The ship is a breeding ground for disease. Fever spreads quickly. The ship's surgeon, if there is one, is a grim man with a saw. Amputation is common. There is no anesthesia. Rum numbs the pain. Sometimes a leather strap is given to bite. Infection is likely. To be wounded is to gamble with your life. Even simple infections, a splinter, a scraped knuckle, can become deadly. The sea offers no clean bandages, no antibiotics, just salt and hope. Storms come suddenly. The sky turns black. Winds scream. The ship lurches like a beast. Everyone is called to deck, to haul sails, to brace the rigging, to man the pumps. Lightning flashes. Rain lashes your skin like needles. You can't see 10 feet ahead. The deck floods. Barrels roll. Men slip. You scream orders and pray to be heard. If the ship begins to sink, there are no lifeboats for you. The officers might escape. You Likely not. Calm days bring no relief. The sun is relentless. The deck turns to an oven. There is no shade. Your lips crack. Your skin burns. The water barrels grow low. You pray for rain. Some ships are becalmed, caught in the doldrums for weeks. You sleep when you can, eat when you must. There is no privacy, no solitude, just motion, just duty. No breeze, no movement, just a vast, unbroken horizon and the slow, creeping fear of starvation. You miss trees, soil, birds that don't follow the ship. Superstition runs deep. Whistling is said to summon storms. A woman aboard is bad luck. A black cat is good luck. Until it dies, you miss silence. True silence, not the constant groan and slap of the sea. Time at sea becomes strange. The days blur. Bells mark the hours, not clocks. Watches are rotated. You miss land. You've survived, at least this time. Some sailors go mad. They talk to shadows. They refuse to eat. They jump into the ocean and vanish. There are stories of sea monsters, of ghost ships, of curses. The Milky Way stretches like a frozen wave across the sky. The sea glows with phosphorescent algae sparkling beneath the hull. Flying fish leap beside the ship. Dolphins race the bow. You learn to read the sky, to feel the wind shift, to know the sea like a living thing. You begin to believe, even if you never did before. Stories are told in low voices, of home, of sweethearts, of lives left behind. There is also beauty. Sometimes, at night, the stars are impossibly bright. There is music. A fiddler plays below deck. Sailors hum old tunes. You share rum. You share space. And when, at last, land is sighted, a green blur on the horizon, your heart beats differently. But it's never over. The sea always calls again. The sun rises slowly over the Indian Ocean, golden and still. There is a strange hush to the sea, as if it knows what's coming. The year is 1629, and a proud ship crests the waters, the flagship of the Dutch East India Company. Her masts tower, her sails are full. She is heavy with goods, crew, and passengers. Over 300 souls sail aboard her, bound for the spice ports of Java. The air is thick with sweat, tobacco, and stale food. The plan, still vague, is to take the ship, not through open mutiny, but through manipulation. If discipline can be eroded, if Pelsert can be weakened, if an incident can be provoked, then perhaps the ship could fall into new hands, and its riches divided freely. Salt meat and hardtack, a single bucket for washing, hammocks slung too close. Rats are a constant presence. The ship groans day and night, and the sound never leaves. And all the while, personalities rub against one another in close quarters. Too many egos packed into too small a world. To the casual observer, the voyage appears orderly. There is commerce to be done, after all. Silks and silver, spices and ambition. But underneath the groaning beams and creaking decks, something darker simmers, a quiet tension, a hidden ambition. The ship is commanded by Francisco Pelset, a senior company official, reserved, thoughtful, but not always forceful. The sailing is left in the hands of Orion Jacobus, the ship's skipper, skilled but resentful of Pelsert's authority. And among the passengers, one stands out quietly, Jeronimus Cornelis, a former apothecary, soft-spoken and pale. He walks the decks with a distant expression, a man of thoughts rather than ropes. But his mind, it turns out, is already drifting toward rebellion. The voyage begins in relative calm. They leave the Netherlands in late October of 1628. The weather is bitter at first, and the seas unfriendly, but the crew presses onward around the Cape of Good Hope and into the open reaches of the Indian Ocean. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months. The rhythm of sea life takes hold. Sailors do their tasks, merchants count their ledgers, women tend to the children, all look out over the endless blue. wondering how much longer they must endure the rocking. The Batavia is not a place of comfort. Below deck, space is cramped. By March, the atmosphere is no longer tense. It is brittle. Skipper Jacobs and Cornelis have begun to whisper together. Discontent has become conspiracy, but fate has a plan of its own. In the early hours of June 4th, with the skies still black and the stars overhead, the Batavia strikes a coral reef. No warning, no storm, no fight. Just the hollow, splitting sound of wood shattering against stone. The reef is part of the Houtman off the western coast of what is now Australia. Remote, unforgiving, unknown to the Dutch sailors. When the sun rises, it reveals the horror clearly. A ship stranded, broken, surrounded by sharp coral and roiling surf. Around it, emptiness. No land in sight. Just scattered low islands and flat, barren rock. The impact is violent. The hull is torn open. Water floods the lower holds. In total, nearly 300 people make it ashore across several small islands, windswept, waterless, and bare. He distributes what little food remains, organizes the survivors, offers a voice of certainty, but beneath his polite exterior, a darker intention brews. Others, particularly officers still loyal to Pelsert, are isolated, sent to distant islands on fruitless missions. Weeb Hayes, a young soldier, is sent with a small group to scout one of the further islands in search of water. Cornelis expects them to die out there, forgotten. Instead, they find a shallow well, and they survive. He has not forgotten his ambitions. The ship may be gone, but the chance to rule, to control, to dominate has arrived. But survival, in this case, is only the beginning of the nightmare. Men are thrown from their hammocks. Children scream. Cargo tumbles and smashes. Confusion spreads in seconds. Lamps swing wildly. Orders are shouted. Some coherent, some panicked. Buckets are passed. Pumps engaged. But it is clear, almost immediately, that Batavia is lost. 4 hours, the ship rocks, half stuck on the reef, slowly taking on water. Survivors begin to evacuate. Lifeboats are lowered. Some attempt to swim. Others cling to broken beams and driftwood. The command structure is immediately strained. Pelsert, still nominally in charge, is indecisive. He knows there is no water on these islands, no food source beyond limpets and seabirds. He must go for help. But with Pelsert gone, a vacuum forms, and into it steps Cornelis. At first, he presents himself as a savior, calm, rational, soft-spoken. He promises order, promises survival. He begins to consolidate power. Those he considers loyal are brought into his confidence. Meanwhile, Cornelis begins his rule, and it quickly turns brutal, and reshape this stranded group into a society he can command without question. His plan is simple: reduce the number of mouths to feed, maintain power through fear and chilling. Dissenters disappear. Men are dragged from their makeshift shelters and drowned. Women are taken, some as concubines. Children are killed quietly, often by night. Entire families vanish from the survivor camp. Those who protest are silenced. Those who obey are spared. For now, building simple defenses with stones and sharpened driftwood. When Cornelis sends men to eliminate them, they are ready. The attackers are repelled. Cornelis keeps his hands clean where he can, allowing his trusted men to carry out the killings. But there is no doubt where the orders come from. Finally, alone, with no ship, no food, no fresh water, just the quiet roar of the ocean, sails on the horizon. Pelsert returns with a rescue ship, but what he finds is not a group of castaways. It is a crime scene, a shattered society, survivors who cannot speak without trembling. But for what came after, for what happens when structure disappears and power is seized by the wrong hands. Mass graves, bloodstains in the sand. Fish move silently through the wreckage, and beneath them, buried in sand and time, fragments of the ship still sleep. What follows is methodical. One by one, rumors swirl. Eyes avoid one another. Silence falls over the camp each evening like a heavy curtain. The islands, so empty, become thick with dread. The killings stretched on for weeks. The survivors live in constant fear. No one knows who will be next. But not all are passive. Weeb Hayes and his men, still alive on the far island, hear of the murders. They begin to fortify their ground. The balance of power begins to shift. The islands are divided between Cornelish's dwindling faction and Hayes's growing resistance. Skirmishes break out. Cornelis is eventually captured, held by Hayes and bound hand and foot. His men falter. Their confidence breaks. In the final days before Pelset's return, and then testimony is recorded. Cornelis is convicted of multiple murders, more than a dozen, perhaps many more. There is no prison to send him to, so judgment is swift. He is executed there, along with several of his closest followers. Pelset holds trials on the island itself. Evidence is gathered. Others are left behind, marooned deliberately as a punishment, perhaps worse than death. Of the original 300+ aboard the Batavia, fewer than half ultimately returned to the Dutch Republic. The wreck of the Batavia is remembered today not merely for the shipwreck itself. It is a story of survival, but not a triumphant one. The sea took the ship, but it was men who brought the real suffering ashore. And still, the tides rise and fall. The reef where the Batavia struck remains, quiet now, white coral, clear water. When you think of pirates, a certain image rises. A man with a tricorn hat, a cutlass at his hip, gold glinting in the sun, and a flag fluttering with the skull and crossbones. There is shouting, cannon smoke, laughter, and danger. A ship veers across the waves, sails torn and men racing across the deck. In a world dominated by kings and empires, these so-called criminals, these rebels and rogues, were building something that looked very much like democracy. Everything about it feels wild, untamed, and lawless. But that image, like so many drawn from storybooks and movies, is a masked one designed to obscure something quieter, stranger, and perhaps more surprising. Because behind the pistols and plunder, real pirates were organizing. They were voting. They were writing constitutions. They were holding each other accountable. And they did it all without permission. It was paperwork. The crew would gather often on deck, under the stars, and draw up a document known as the Articles. These were the pirate code, and unlike the laws of monarchs, these were agreed upon by vote. To understand where this began, you have to first understand who became a pirate. They were not born under black flags. Most were sailors, ordinary men, bound by contract to ships owned by merchants, navies, or trading companies. For many, the black flag did not represent greed or violence. It represented freedom. Their lives were hard, brutally so. We've already seen what life was like on a 17th century ship. The food was spoiled, the punishments harsh, the work unrelenting. A common sailor had no voice, no rights, and no share in the profit his labor created. He was paid a wage, if paid at all. And if he complained, if he questioned an officer, he could be flogged, jailed, or left behind. In that world, piracy didn't just offer a life of crime. It offered escape. Escape from hierarchy, from abuse, from servitude. And that freedom had rules. When a new pirate crew formed, usually after a mutiny or capture of a prize ship, the first order of business was not drinking or dancing or dividing the loot. Every man had a say. The articles varied ship to ship, but certain themes appeared again and again. No fighting aboard the ship. Disputes must be settled on shore, away from the rest of the crew, often through duels. Punishments were listed in advance and voted upon. This was not arbitrary justice handed down from above. It was ruled by agreement. Injury compensation, for instance. If a pirate lost a leg in battle, he might receive 800 pieces of 8, a life-altering sum. A lost eye might bring 100. These weren't tokens. They were formal, codified assurances. Risk in pirate society was acknowledged and compensated. No stealing from one another. Loot was to be divided according to share. and those shares were clearly defined, and if he misused his power, if he became cruel, cowardly, or greedy, the crew could depose him. Far from it, they killed, they robbed, they threatened coastal towns and merchant convoys, they attacked and sometimes tortured. If a merchant ship surrendered quickly, no one died, but if it resisted, if it fought, it risked retribution. And so pirates crafted an image of terror, flags with skeletons, tales of horror, gruesome spectacles. These were not simply acts of madness. They were branding, psychological warfare designed to make future targets surrender without a fight. Many were violent men, and some found pleasure in cruelty. The real power on many ships rested not with the captain, but with the quartermaster, a kind of representative chosen by the crew to safeguard their interests, resolve disputes, and oversee division of plunder. If the captain was the sword, the quartermaster was the shield. The captain might get 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, and ordinary crewmen 1 each. But even the lowest member had a guaranteed portion. No one was cut out. Parliament was for the elite. Justice was uneven. Wealth flowed upward. But aboard a pirate ship, a black man could serve beside a white one as an equal. A former slave could become a quartermaster. Decisions were made collectively, and the profits were shared. Provisions were equal, so were arms. Some ships banned gambling, others banned alcohol during combat. Even more remarkable, pirates built in protections that most navies did not. Leadership was not based on blood or birth. The captain was elected. He could be removed at any time by vote. All of this sounds radical, because it was in the world most pirates came from: monarchies and empires, slavery and strict social hierarchies. Ordinary people had no say. It was a floating rebellion. Of course, this is not to say that pirates were peaceful, but the surprising thing is that the violence was often deliberate, a tool, not a habit. Pirates cultivated fear as a weapon of efficiency. The reality behind that mask of horror was often quite strategic. Some pirate captains went out of their way to treat captives well. Sailors on merchant ships were often invited to join, and many did. A pirate crew, with its equal shares and shared decision-making, offered something no merchant ship ever could: a voice. Pirates killed when they had to, but they weren't interested in elaborate theatrics. What mattered was control and survival. Ships couldn't function without order, and so rules against drunkenness, fighting, and stealing were enforced not to ruin fun, but to preserve the cohesion needed to survive on the sea. Loyalty mattered. A ship at sea, facing storms and battles, needed unity more than fear. Even the famous walking the plank, so beloved in fiction, has no strong historical record. Pirate codes also reflected a surprising concern for stability. In an age when most governments were ruled by divine right, pirates created micro-democracies, floating states of consent, but always they were agreed upon. That act, agreement, was sacred, because in a world of chaos, where the law was a distant enemy and the sea an indifferent master, agreement was the only thing that held people together, and they spread. When captured, pirates from different ships would often name the same rules, the same expectations. The articles were not isolated, they were a culture. His articles forbade gambling, drinking after dark, and allowed no women aboard. He held Sunday prayers. Disputes were settled through arbitration or formal combat, never in a brawl, and his crew followed him not because they feared him, but because they respected the structure he maintained. In whispers, the story remained that once, in the corners of empire, on the backs of stolen ships, men had written their own laws, the names of men long dead, scratched in jagged script. What survives isn't just the record of theft or mutiny. It is a reminder that even in the most lawless places, humans seek order. Even among thieves, there can be honor. And even in rebellion, there is a kind of law. Not perfect laws, not gentle ones, but chosen laws. And they lived by them, if only for a while. The The British cracked down hard, offering amnesty to those who surrendered and swift execution to those who didn't. Hundreds were hanged. The pirate republics, like the rumored one in Nassau, collapsed. The flags came down. The articles disappeared into salt and dust. Votes being cast. Agreements made. A captain stepping down. A new one elected. A crew adrift but united, sailing not by the stars, but by a code of their own making. Consider the ship of Bartholomew Roberts, perhaps the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. Roberts was eventually killed in battle in 1722, but by then he had captured over 400 ships. Leaving the crew without permission could mean marooning, being left alone on a deserted island with a small cask of water and gunpowder. It was a death sentence, but again, one agreed upon by all. The worst punishment a pirate feared was not pain, it was betrayal, the breaking of solidarity. Many pirate codes also included clauses about desertion, and yet pirate ships were not utopias. They could be harsh, unforgiving places. There was little room for weakness and little tolerance for indecision. Captains needed to act in battle. Crews had to be disciplined. In combat, hesitation meant death. And while many pirates came from marginalized backgrounds, they were not revolutionaries in the modern sense. Their codes protected their own, not the world beyond. But still, the codes remain remarkable. In some cases, the articles were written down on paper and signed by all. Other times, they were passed down orally. It was fragile, but it was real. When the golden age of piracy ended in the 1720s, brought down by stronger navies and new treaties, the pirate codes faded with it. But the ideas didn't vanish completely. Long after the last pirate was tried, tales of their codes lingered. Writers romanticized them. Revolutionaries admired them. Today, fragments of those articles still exist in archives. Old parchment, faded ink. It is quiet now, and the sea is calm. But if you listen closely, beyond the sound of waves, you might still hear the echo of voices on the wind. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing they ever did. At the very top of the wooden world that drifted across the sea, behind closed doors and thick oak partitions, another life was unfolding. Far removed from the smell of bilge water, the sweat of rope-hauling men, and the cold communal buckets of the lower decks, the captain's cabin, sometimes shared with an admiral if aboard a flagship, was the most spacious compartment on the ship. But compared to the rest of the ship, it was another realm entirely. Navigation instruments, compasses, dividers, charts rolled in tight scrolls, lay in ordered arrangement. On the walls, a rack of pistols, a saber, gleaming and ceremonial, resting in easy reach. When they did host others, lieutenants, dignitaries, or allied merchants, the cabin transformed into a dining hall, its long central table revealed beneath a canvas covering. Cabinets with brass handles held carefully folded clothes, ledgers, and correspondence. At the rear, or stern, where the ship's widest windows allowed light to spill in, this cabin was both sanctuary. Pickled vegetables in small ceramic jars, wheels of cheese from the home country, carefully wrapped and stowed before the voyage began. There might be fresh bread, baked by the ship's cook when time and flour permitted, or something resembling it. And stage, a private retreat, and a public statement of power. The officers' quarters told a different story, one that was polished with brass, heavy with tobacco smoke, and scented faintly with citrus and brandy. If you were allowed to enter, and very few were, you would find yourself stepping not into a room, but into a world within a... It was not luxurious by modern standards. No, the floorboards still creaked, the rooms still pitched and rolled with the sea. There might be a broad writing desk, bolted to the floor, with ink pots carefully nested into holes carved into the wood. A chair, heavy and her-backed, would be secured with thick ropes to prevent it from sliding when the ship rolled. Curtains, actual curtains, might sway gently in the breeze, and in some cases a rug from Persia or the Ottoman Empire would lie flat, defying the sea's salt air. The admiral or captain often dined alone, but not always. On such evenings, the space filled with the flicker of oil lamps, the soft clink of cutlery on pewter, the low murmur of voices muffled by the thick wood of the surrounding ship. You would not find hardtack here, nor salted pork grey with brine. Instead, the officers' mess might serve cold roast fowl, preserved in wine or vinegar. Fruit, too, was rare, but not unknown. Lemons, prized for their scurvy-preventing virtue, might appear, especially if the voyage had made recent landfall. Apples, when stored in barrels, layered with straw, could last weeks before softening, and citrus peels, candied or preserved, were a luxury kept in tin boxes, offered sparingly and with ceremony. Wine, more often than rum, was served at this level of the ship, red, rich, and carefully rationed, poured into goblets or fluted glasses, their bases weighted to resist the roll of the ship. Brandy, too, was common, sipped slowly, warming the chest and loosening the tongue, as conversation drifted from logistics to politics to memory. Conversation in the Admiral's cabin was never idle. It moved with tides of its own, formal, deliberate, and layered with unspoken meanings. Rank was never left at the door. Even in private, even over sweetened tea, the structure of authority held instructions for estates back home, updates to merchants or governors, reports to the Admiralty or Naval Command, the cutlass on the wall, a reminder of duty. All roads, in a sense, led here. Every grievance from below, every report from the crow's nest, every cannonball in the hold, all passed, eventually, through this cabin. The map on the desk, a vision of empire or danger. These papers, penned by hand in careful script, were sealed with wax and stored in leather folios bound for distant desks. The captain, or admiral, bore a weight the lower decks rarely saw. There were few equals on board, few safe confidants. Every smile might hide ambition, every shared meal a test of loyalty. The sudden lurch of a wave, even in privilege, the sea refused to yield its rest to see. Every decision, from discipline to navigation, engagement to retreat, settled on their shoulders. They were far more than figureheads. They were stewards of men, of mission, of imperial will. And so, even in quiet moments, the cabin pulsed with an invisible tension. When alone, the admiral might retire with a book, a well-worn volume of naval regulations, or the poetry of Horace, or theological essays inked in dense type. Candles flickered near the bunk, a modest bed built into the wall, with fine wool blankets and a single pillow. Sleep, even here, came unevenly. The creak of the hull, the distant call of the watch. Letters, too, were written here. Many never delivered. Love letters, often practical in tone, rarely sentimental. In this space, every object carried meaning. The inkpot was a lifeline to civilization. Here, on this floating island of cloth and timber, the admiral stood at the center of a miniature world, and yet, despite its trappings, the admiral's world was a lonely one. So when the lamps dimmed and the sea outside rocked the stern windows like a cradle, the admiral sat alone or in company, knowing that command was not a seat of comfort, but a posture of endurance. Even in velvet-lined chairs, while the lower decks carried the rhythm of survival, the steady churn of labor, the scraping of bowls, the aching bodies collapsed into hammocks. The upper world followed a rhythm of its own, one ruled not by the pull of ropes or the timing of tides, but by formality, protocol, and tradition. In the officers' mess, even a simple midday meal followed a kind of ceremony. Time was marked, not by the sun alone, but by the structured routine of naval life. Bells struck at regular intervals, not for show, but to dictate the passage of the watch, and meals, like everything else aboard a well-roomed vessel, fit neatly into the order of things. First, there would be the call. A midshipman or steward would deliver the message discreetly. The table was laid. The captain or admiral was ready. No one outranked him here. not even men of noble blood or wealthier upbringing. These were not idle musings, but coded affirmations of taste, education, worldliness. Even leisure aboard was a kind of performance. Once aboard, the ship's hierarchy stood above all else. Knives with bone handles, linen napkins, pressed before departure and now slightly yellowed by sea air. Glasses for wine. He knew when to refill a glass, when to appear with a second helping, and when to disappear entirely. His loyalty was not spoken of, but it was invaluable. Smaller cups for coffee when beans were available. A rare indulgence from the West Indies or the Levant, ground with great care by the cook or steward. Then came the procession. Officers would arrive one by one, uniforms clean but worn, their boots shine to a dull gleam. Their faces, hardened by salt and sun, bore the calm gravity of responsibility. There was little laughter, at least at first. Every step, every word mattered. The table itself was modest but dignified, plates of pewter or porcelain. The steward, always a quiet presence, moved with practiced grace. Conversation, once the initial silence had settled, began to flow. Not the casual chatter of friends, but the deliberate exchange of men trained in command. Reports of weather, sail trim, the state of provisions, rumors from the last port, speculations on enemy movement, merchant traffic, or imperial strategy. Then, perhaps, softer topics emerged. The condition of a beloved horse left back home, the merits of French brandy over Spanish, the relative quality of cigars from Jamaica compared to those from Cuba. Politics sometimes surfaced. Carefully, in some ships, loyalty to the crown was absolute. In others, the officer class might quietly complain of ministerial interference, of poor decisions made in London or Amsterdam or Lisbon by men who had never felt the swell of the Atlantic under their boots. Not all admirals approved of such things, but others encouraged it. They knew that morale was a fragile thing, especially among educated men whose minds could easily drift toward dissatisfaction when left unstimulated. Music, too, might make an appearance. A fiddle kept in the cabin, a flute softly played in the night watch. And yet, even here, privilege had its limits. Storms did not discriminate. The captain's chair, no matter how firmly lashed, could still pitch dangerously. Dishes slid, wine splashed, and in the worst tempests, the admiral's table was cleared not for food, but for maps and orders, poured over by lamplight as the ship groaned in protest. There was also the matter of punishment. Not only were these men tasked with steering the ship, but with managing hundreds of souls, balancing logistics with diplomacy, force with fairness, punishment with mercy. Some thrived, though the officers did not wield the lash themselves. They authorized its use. A man might be brought before the captain during breakfast, his crime read aloud: theft, insubordination, drunkenness. Beneath the trimmed lamps, beside pewter forks and preserved pears, the admiral's world turned slowly, a delicate performance of control, bearing, and quiet calculation. They stood, expressionless, as the bosun fulfilled the duty. The cat-o'-nine-tails tore through silence. Blood was not discussed. The lash was not debated. Who listened when others spoke, and understood that leadership required not only rank, but restraint. Order, after all, was sacred. The sea whispered against the hull, their meals no richer. The waves kept rolling, but their ships, more often than not, the balance of power stood, held not by iron, but by expectation, ran smoother, and when the voyage ended, their names were spoken with loyalty, a rare treasure in the harsh world of naval life. The punishment would be issued in calm tones, while tea cooled and eggs congealed. The sea did not pause for sentiment. Then, later on, decked sentence would be carried out. Officers did not look away, and when the noise ended and the man was taken below, the captain might return to his cabin, to a fresh pot of coffee and a plate of preserved fruit. But neither did these men forget. Officers carried the memories with them, the responsibility, the cost of decisions. Some recorded it in journals, their handwriting steady but introspective. Others turned inward, speaking little between ports, and a few unraveled quietly. The pressures of command bore down without respite, all from this narrow slice of deck, behind polished brass hinges and thick cabin walls. And yet, there were officers who took pride in fairness, who treated their men with quiet respect, who knew when to bend rules to preserve morale. Their cabins were no grander. So, outside, inside, and as always, at first glance, the Admiral's quarters might have seemed almost luxurious. A small haven carved out of wood and canvas. There might be a writing desk, varnished and sturdy, a bunk with a real mattress, not a swinging hammock, perhaps a glass-fronted cabinet housing books, navigation instruments, and a few mementos, a carved figurine, a pipe, a miniature portrait of a loved one left behind on shore. But such comforts were deceptive. These private spaces, gently swaying with the rhythm of the sea, were not places of rest alone. They were command posts, offices, sanctuaries, and prisons all at once. The Admiral slept in a room that was never truly dark and never truly still. The sea knocked and whispered against the hull just inches away. Lanterns burned low, casting long shadows. The wood creaked with memory of storms, of distant cannon fire, of whispered mutiny, and every knock at the door could bring news of disaster. A torn sail, a man overboard, spoiled rations, a dead lookout. Even the very air in the cabin felt different. It was heavy with maps, rolled, pinned, stained with ink and salt. A clean shirt, a wig powdered when powder was available, boots polished. Every gesture conveyed authority, even in solitude, even in the face of looming squalls or dwindling supplies. The Admiral spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man with time to spare, even when he had none. He described the noise of voices obeying, followed by the stillness of responsibility settling upon the soul. He spoke of longing, not for land or wine or even safety, but for the absence of expectation, a moment when no one looked to him for guidance. Charts of unfamiliar coastlines, tidal records, lists of known shoals and enemy movements. Some kept journals, not official logs, but personal writings hidden beneath mattresses or tucked in the back of sea chests. There, they poured their frustrations, their fears, their confessions, not for posterity, but for release. Not of tyrants or heroes, but of deeply human men, burdened with the task of holding order against the pull of chaos. The Admiral's sleep, when it came at all, was often broken by the responsibilities sketched out in those pale lines. A whisper among the crew that the man in command no longer seemed quite so certain. And still, there was an image to maintain. Each morning, before the ship fully stirred, the Admiral dressed with care, a waistcoat, perhaps embroidered, though faded by salt. Not vanity, necessity, because aboard a vessel far from land, surrounded by restless men and uncertain winds, perception was power. A careless word, a rumpled coat, a show of hesitation, these small cracks could spread. A murmured doubt among the junior officers, a sidelong glance from a midshipman, and so the performance continued. Every order was issued calmly, every chart studied without urgency, but beneath the mask of control, many struggled. In one such diary, an admiral on a West Indies voyage in the late 1600s wrote of the silence that followed command. And in these writings, a portrait emerges. For every storm passed, another loomed on the horizon. For every mutiny avoided, another rumor brewed below deck. Even dinner could be a quiet battle. Guests at the captain's table, foreign dignitaries, company officers, colonial governors, often brought more than conversation. They brought diplomacy, demands, and delicate tensions. A misplaced word, a perceived insult, could ripple far beyond the ship. A Dutch merchant might sneer at the Portuguese spices. An English colonial officer might question the readiness of the crew. Veiled criticism delivered between bites of roast turtle or dried apricots, and so meals became negotiations. But in politics, in favors, alliances, rivalries, and debts, a guest from the Spanish Main might refuse the rum, demanding sherry. The admiral would smile. Listen, respond with care. He knew that ships did not sail in water alone. In one case, a French emissary aboard a British warship took offense when his napkin was not folded in the traditional Parisian style. It seems absurd now, but in that moment, the entire atmosphere of the voyage hung in the balance, soothed only by a bottle of rare claret, quietly produced from the captain's private stores. Promotions, privileges, access to charts, even the order of seating at dinner, all sent signals. A sudden silence, a shift in the wind, the telltale groan of overstrained timbers. Every sound carried meaning. Once you learned how to hear it, a man seated too far from the head of the table might feel slighted. Another, passed over for a commendation, might whisper resentment during the night watch. A hand resting on the small table beside him, where even in slumber, a map or quill was never far. Because diplomacy, like navigation, often required subtle shifts and precise corrections. Even among his own officers, the admiral played a delicate game. He could not appear aloof, but neither too familiar. Authority had to be maintained, but never weaponized without care. And so the admiral moved through his duties with careful intent, measuring every gesture, weighing every decision not only for its outcome, but for its effect on morale. He could not show favoritism, yet he could not be cold. Such balance in acts wore on a man, and though the admiral had the best bed on the ship, it rarely offered rest. At night, he might lie awake, listening to the low murmur of the sea, not for comfort, but for changes in pitch. He knew that his officers, too, listened, that the crew could sense unease, so he remained still, eyes open in the dark. It was a lonely kind of command, dignified, yes, but unrelenting, even on calm waters, even under clear skies. As days passed at sea, the admiral became less a man and more an institution, a presence, an expectation, a fixed star for the rest of the ship to orient around. Even when he was not seen, he was felt, but his decisions filtered down in ways both small and sweeping. A change in course, a shift in daily rations, a new man appointed to supervise repairs. The crew might go days without catching more than a glimpse, perhaps a silhouette moving behind the stern window, or a fleeting sight of his boots crossing the quarterdeck. He passed between gun carriages and crates, nodding occasionally, observing everything. The crew straightened. Officers followed a few paces behind. It was theater, but it mattered. He might notice things, a loosened rope, an unsharpened blade, a man who limped more than he let on. He wrote it all down, not always with judgment, but always with awareness. Yet there were moments when the admiral, too, could not escape the rhythms of the voyage. During inspections, he walked the length of the ship, hat tucked beneath his arm, speaking little. For that brief hour, the divisions of the ship became visible, those who commanded and those who obeyed. And afterward, the admiral returned to his cabin, perhaps a little more burdened than before. He could not repair every sail himself. He could not comfort every homesick youth, but he could see, and that, sometimes, was enough. He would not dance, he would not sing, but he would watch. They would sleep in wet wool and eat worm-riddled grain. They deserved this moment. Perhaps he did too, and smile, and allow the warmth of camaraderie to soften the lines at the corners of his eyes. Still, there were occasions when the thin barrier between ranks dissolved temporarily, and always with a purpose. The handwriting might be fading, the wax seal long cracked. When the sea was kind and the wind steady, a feast might be declared, not for indulgence, but for morale. Barrels of ale would be rolled out. Biscuits slightly less hard than usual would be distributed. Men stomped, laughed, sang old songs from old places, villages and harbors long left behind. For a few hours, rank soft, the crew became a community, if only briefly. Salted beef, reboiled with a bit of onion if any remained, and, if fortune had smiled on the ship's last port, perhaps a wheel of cheese or a handful of preserved cherries. The admiral would emerge from his cabin, not as a superior officer, but as host. Music followed. A fiddler, maybe two. A drummer tapping out an uneven rhythm. The admiral might sit apart, quietly sipping watered wine, because he knew these men would climb rigging in storms. They would haul cannon uphill. Later, he would retreat once more behind the heavy door of his quarters, back to the charts, the ledgers, the correspondence waiting to be inked. He might reread an old letter, creased and softened by salt air, from a daughter, a wife, a brother. Still, it connected him to land, to life beyond the endless blue. Even at the height of authority, loneliness crept in. There were others aboard who understood this feeling. The ship's chaplain, perhaps, a quiet man with a thin voice who held sparse Sunday services and tended to the sick. Or the surgeon, who had seen more death than victory, and spent his nights sharpening instruments that could both save and maim. Sometimes, in the small hours, the admiral and one of these men might share a bottle of something strong, not as officers, not as symbols of the crown or company, but as men, tired, worn, holding steady, of whether the stars above cared at all for what happened below. They might speak of philosophy, of God, and they would part, wordlessly, returning to their solitude. Memories blurred into one another, one port like the next, one storm indistinguishable from the last, because aboard a ship there were few places to be truly alone. But the admiral's cabin was one of them. It was his sanctuary, his crown and his cage, and the voyage continued. The crew aged more quickly than they realized. Salt worked into their skin, into their joints. Voices grew hoarse from shouting into wind. But for the admiral, time moved differently. He measured it in ink, dates scrawled in logs, observations noted at dawn and dusk. He saw the subtle shifts in discipline, in morale. He watched as young officers hardened into leaders or cracked under pressure. He monitored supplies not just by weight, but by what they did to men's spirits. He carried the sea with him, in the lines of his face, in the stiffness of his back, in the measured cadence of his speech. The dwindling of sugar could demoralize faster than a broken spar. It looked like a thread, a fragile silver cord stretching across the sea. His ship's path, his legacy, and so he adjusted, quietly, constantly. He was the rudder beneath the hull, unseen, but always steering, not by sight, but by the silence that fell. A hush of recognition, a shift in the crew's posture. On some nights, he stood alone at the stern, hands folded behind his back, watching the wake ripple out behind the ship. Few would remember his name, fewer still would recall his decisions, but the ship sailed because he did not falter. And when, at last, land broke the horizon, green and distant, a line beneath the clouds, it was he who first knew arrival, and with it, the end of one voyage and the quiet beginning of another, because an admiral never truly returned home. He had eaten from silver, but he had also carried the weight of every soul aboard. That was the cost of command. That was the burden of the calmest room on a ship. And somewhere beyond the surf, a new order awaited, a new mission. But for this moment, there was nothing but the rocking of the deck, the gulls overhead, and the promise of stillness, if only for a night. And now, the sea quiets. The sails have gone still, the wind has eased, and the long voyage has come to its end. You've traveled through the damp, creaking darkness of the lower decks, walked the narrow planks of survival and scarcity, and felt the salt air sting your eyes. You've heard the lash crack, the waves roar, and the mutinous whispers on distant shores. You were there, in the shadow of the Batavia, watching loyalty fracture and desperation rise. You glimpsed the strange order beneath piracy's lawless surface, the silent agreements scratched into the wood of a captain's cabin, the whispered codes passed between brothers in exile. The 17th century sea was a place of endless motion, constant labor, and quiet in. It reminds us how far we've come, how soft our pillows have become, how rare it is now to go to sleep hungry or afraid of the horizon. For every tale of treasure, there were 100 more of spoiled food, swollen gums, and nights broken by storms. And finally, he dined among the brass and velvet of Naval Command, where the table was laid with silver, but the air was thick with expectation, responsibility, and unspoken rules. You saw that luxury, too, came at a cost, not of salt and sweat, but of status and of the quiet weight of command. It was never a romantic life. It was never the stuff of legend, not for those who lived it. But history, even at its most uncomfortable, offers something rare, a gentle humility. So now, you can let all of it go. The ropes are coiled, the lanterns are dimmed, the deck is silent but for the slow rhythm of the sea. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the timbers fade. Let the tide carry the rest of your thoughts out with it, and sleep peacefully on dry land. Good night.